Enjoy it. Let's check it out.
Guys.
So I want to welcome all of our Atlanta area churches. For those of you who are in one of the buildings with us, way to go getting up on this rainy Sunday. And for those of you who are watching at home, no judgment, we don't blame you. All of us, except for maybe me and a handful of the staff, considered joining you this morning. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us online. And for those of you who are really all over the country, all over the world, who join us, we get letters and email all the time. And it's just so much fun. And I know I say this almost every Sunday. It's so much fun to see God raising up in our country specifically, but around the world as well, a new generation of Jesus followers who understand that at the end of the day, it's about following Jesus. And it's about living our lives in such a way that people see our good deeds and connect the dots between the way we live and who we worship. So thanks for being a part of that ever expanding community in these crazy times in which we live. So our oldest son, who's 30 now, when he was 7 years old, true story, when he was 7 years old, our standard babysitter, you know how as a family, you know, you have like the person you lean into that, you know, he or she is usually, she is, you know, usually there for this. This is our standard babysitter. Our standard like weekly babysitter ran over his arm in the driveway with her Honda Accord. True story, ran right over his arm. And, you know, it was terrifying in the moment, but ultimately, from that moment on, Andrew, our son, pretty much controlled the relationship. Because it's hard to say no to a kid after you ran over his arm in his driveway with your Honda Accord. And so, you know, hey, Andrew, it's time to run upstairs and get ready for bed. I don't think so. Remember when you ran over my arm with your Honda Accord, you know? I'll have root beer on crushed ice, please. I'll wait. You know, you're pretty much in control of the relationship. Now, Melissa, of course, was horrified, but as it turns out, it was an accident. She didn't mean to run over his arm with her Honda Accord. She didn't do it on purpose. And so when we realized it was an accident, we didn't see any need to take Andrew to the ER because it was an accident. Right? I mean, if it's an accident, we just knew he was fine. I said, Andrew, stop crying. It was an accident. Stop crying. She did not mean to run over your arm. Well, actually, no, we did take Andrew to the ER because, and this is what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes, the reason we took him is because there is no necessary correlation between intent and outcome. There is no necessary, I almost just put there's no correlation, but, you know, I'll give you a little wiggle room. There's no necessary correlation between intent and outcome. So if you got up today and came and are watching because you're looking for something deep, this is the deep part right here. There is no necessary correlation between intent and outcome. Today we are actually in part 3 of a series, if you haven't been tracking with us, entitled The Weight of Your Words, the weight of your words. And if you've ever been crushed by anyone's words, you already understand the intent and the theme of this series. And we have all been injured by, to some degree, crushed by the words of other people because words carry weight. Words leave a mark. Words leave a mark for good or for bad. Words encourage, they discourage, they build, they destroy, they inspire, and sometimes the words of other people actually wound us. And I think, as we've talked about in the series, all of our lives have been shaped to some extent by the words spoken to us, the words spoken over us, the words spoken at us, and even the words spoken about us that we found out later. Our lives, as well, as we talked about in the first part of this series, some of our lives have been impacted by words we never heard, words we longed to hear, wanted to hear. Mommy loves you. I'm so proud of you. I'll always have your back. And the interesting thing is, as we've said in this series, as quick as we are to recognize how our lives have been impacted by the words of other people, for some reason, it doesn't seem like it should be this way, for some reason, we are slow to take responsibility for how our words impact other people, which should bother all of us. I mean, this isn't like a faith thing or a Christian thing. This is just a human thing. That should bother all of us, that we don't take seriously the way our words impact other people. But it must impact, and there's a group of us that must take it seriously, and that's those of us who claim to be Christians or Jesus followers. Because wielding our words responsibly and stewarding our words carefully is baked into what it means to be a Jesus follower. It's essential to following Jesus, because as Jesus followers, we are to be characterized by others first. We are others first people. We are one another people, which means as a Jesus follower, I don't have the freedom to wield my words and use my words any way I want to. As a Jesus follower, I've been instructed in terms of how I'm to use and how I'm to leverage and how you're to use and leverage your words. In fact, just a moment, if you're not a Jesus follower, if you're not a Christian, isn't it true if you're not a Jesus follower or a Christian, that you might be more curious about Christianity if the Christians you knew and know had been more gracious with their words towards you and more gracious with their words when they talked about the people closest to you and the people that you love? So in this series, we're talking about three dynamics that impact every single communication we have with the people around us, every single conversation. Three dynamics that determine what people hear, regardless of what we say, and as we'll see today, regardless of what we actually mean. And the interesting thing, and I'm not pointing fingers at you, I'm so much part of the audience with this. We've all been on the receiving end of all three of these dynamics many, many, many times, which it would seem like would sensitize to how powerful they are, and consequently, we would kind of sort of get on board with these things and make sure we leverage them positively because they've been leveraged against us negatively, all of us. But for some reason, even knowing that, they're still not intuitive. The first one we talked about in part one is this, that words aren't equally weighted, that negatives weigh way more, that the ratio of positives to negatives matter in every relationship. Number two, we talked about in part two, source determines weight. The source of a word determines the weight of a word. Who said it determines how much it weighs. Who said it determines the impact of it. That there are people in your lives, their words weigh 500 pounds. Other people, their words weigh 50 pounds. And then when we turn it around, there are people in your life that your words weigh 100 pounds. Your words weigh 500 pounds. And we have to take that into consideration. And the way we said it was this, that we should remember who and what we represent to the person on the other side of us. That you should remember who and what you represent, who you are and what you represent to the people, the person on the other side of you. Because although you are in a relationship with them, chances are it is not the same relationship. There's somebody has a little more influence, somebody has a little more power, somebody has a little more authority. And we should always take into consideration who we are and what we represent to the person on the other side of us, because that gives our words weight. And we're responsible for how our weighty words impact the person and the people on the other side of us. So today, we're going to wrap this up and talk about this third dynamic. And the number three is simply this, that intent is usually irrelevant. The intent of our words is usually irrelevant. Back to this kind of big idea I introduced a few minutes ago. There is no necessary correlation when it comes to words. There's no necessary correlation between intent and outcome. Now, the interesting thing is, nobody would argue with this when it comes to the physical world. I mean, if you've ever accidentally broken a window, you understand this. If you ever accidentally, broke your husband's favorite MLB bobblehead, you understand this. If you ever cracked or broke your mother-in-law's one of her collector plates, you understand this, right? You get it. You get it because it was an accident. You didn't mean to, but the window has to be replaced. The bobblehead has to be glued back together, and you have to go online and try to find that plate, because not only was it hers, her mother gave it to her, and her mother gave it to you, and this is just gonna be an expensive thing. But either way, there's something must be done. The fact that it was an accident is almost completely irrelevant. Broken is broken regardless of intent. And this is where we go wrong with our words, explaining does not equal repairing. In fact, this is such a big idea, especially for those of you, and when we think about family relationships, I want us to actually say this out loud together. Would you just say this with me? Explaining does not equal repairing. Now, you're going to be tempted to use this against someone in your home. I'm sharing this with you so you can remember when you are about to open your mouth and explain something, thinking, once I explain it, then we don't have to take Andrew to the ER because I explained it was an accident. I explained that I didn't mean to break the window, didn't mean to knock the bobblehead off the mantle. You know, I didn't mean to. Explaining does not equal repairing, and we know that in the physical world, but when it comes to relationships and when it comes to our words, for some reason, we just absolutely forget. In fact, an explanation, again, when you're on the receiving end, an explanation oftentimes is just irritating, especially when it's related to hurtful words. And then when we're on the receiving end of accidental hurtful words and the other person begins explaining what they really meant, it's not just irrelevant, it's not just irritating, rather, it's irrelevant. I mean, in those moments, we don't need an explanation, do we? Do you know what we need? And do you know what they need when it's you, when you're the offender? We just need to be glued back together. Don't explain it, just glue me back together. Don't excuse it, I just need to be glued back together. And then, okay, when they wonder, okay, you know, again, you're the offending party in my little illustration here. When they wonder why we're still upset, I mean, after our explanation, and they're still upset and we can't figure out, why are you still upset? I just explained what I meant by what I said. That's even more insensitive. But when we're hurt by someone else's words, we actually do the very thing we don't want them to do when they hurt us. Do you know what we do? We all have a tendency to retreat to intent. Even though when it's coming our way, an explanation is not helpful, we still run to intent in order to explain our words. I didn't mean it that way. That didn't come out right. Okay, let me back up. That didn't come out right. I was just trying to be funny. It wasn't my intent to hurt you. Now, hang with me. Do you know what that statement and those other statements and statements like those, do you know what those statements actually communicate in the moment? You've been on the receiving end of this, so you have felt it whether you put a word around it or not. When we make those kinds of statements, what we are actually communicating, even though it's not our intention, we are communicating blame. We're blaming, this is amazing. And we don't, again, in the moment, we don't catch on to this. We are actually blaming the person we hurt for taking what we said the way they took it. We're actually blaming the person we hurt with our words for taking what we said the way that they took it. They were wrong. You were wrong to interpret my words the way you did. It's actually your fault that you got your feelings hurt, because you should be more mature. You should be tougher. You should be smarter than that. You should have more insight than that. You should be more professional than that. And again, it's not our intent to blame, but that's what it feels like when we begin to explain and when we run to intent. It feels like we're blaming them for the way they feel because of our lame explanation. We're just explaining, right? But don't ever forget this. Explaining sounds like, feels like blaming. What I meant was, you took it the wrong way. Explaining in those moments with hurtful words almost always sounds like and feels like blaming. And then, to just make it worse, when we combine, because all of us, you know, we're all willing to apologize, right? When we realize we've messed up, we'll apologize. But when we combine an apology with an explanation, not only do they feel blame, they feel something else as well. And again, you've been on the receiving end of this. I've been on the receiving end of this. Why is this so hard for us to remember? When an apology and an explanation are combined, the other thing the person on the other side of us begins to feel, they feel pressure. They feel expectation. I've explained myself. I expect you to feel better now. Do you feel better now? You don't feel better now? What's wrong with you? I explained myself. You should feel better now. You don't feel better now? What's wrong with you? I just explained myself. When an apology and an explanation, then when the apology and the explanation don't work like a magic wand, because isn't it true? It's like, I explained myself. I'm the fairy godmother. Now we're all back to, back in Kansas, right? I mean, our Jedi mind trick. I mean, surely my words have erased all those negative feelings and we're back to where we were, right? They're still angry. They're still withdrawn. They're still hurt. You know what we do? Do you know what I do if I'm not careful? Then we press harder. It's just ridiculous. I said, I'm sorry. I mean, implication, why aren't you fine now? I expect you to be fine now that I've explained myself. Why aren't we fine now? Why aren't we back to where we were before I said what I said? Well, for the same reason that if you slam my fingers in your car door and you apologize, it doesn't transport me back to my pre-crushed finger condition. My fingers are still crushed in your car door regardless of your apology, right? So don't want you to ever forget this if you're Christians, because this is so important. And if you're not a Christian, gosh, this is worth waiting through a sermon for. This is so important when you think about the people you love the most. Apologies, I mean, again, in the physical world, it's so obvious. Apologies don't reverse and erase accidental injuries to the body. Apologies don't reverse and erase accidental injuries to the soul, to the heart, to the security of the relationship, to the confidence of the other person. They don't restore the relationship. An apology combined with an explanation, again, just sounds like an excuse. Another attempt to shift the blame. And in some ways, not always, but in some ways, word damage to the heart of a person, word damage is worse than physical damage. You see, I'm pretty confident you didn't mean to slam the car door on my fingers. I feel confident that was an accident, right? But I'm not so confident you didn't mean what you just said. I'm not so confident that even though you didn't mean to say it that way, that you meant something by it. You may not have intended for that to slip out, but the fact that it slipped out meant that it was in there. And why shouldn't I assume that what you just said about me isn't still in there? I'm not completely convinced that I didn't just learn something about the way you view me and value me. See, this is a big deal. And we know it's a big deal because we've been on the receiving end. We know the ding and the dent that words have made to some relationships, that we may never get back to where we were before, because now I know what's in your heart about me, and it slipped out, but it was in there to begin with, and it takes a long time sometimes to recover from those words. This is why, this is so amazing, this is why what James, the brother of Jesus, said is so on point. Now, I know I say this all the time, but I'm just gonna say it anyway again. Just a little sidebar. In your English New Testament or your online Bible, or you may not have opened a Bible in years and years and years, but you should consider this. In the English New Testament, we have a document written by the brother of Jesus. Okay, and I want you to go find it. If you haven't read the Bible in a long time, just go to get an online Bible or YouTube, YouVersion Bible, and don't think about that you're reading the Bible. I want you to consider this. James, who grew up with Jesus, like Mary was his mother, right? Okay, James, the brother of Jesus, wrote a document, and we have a copy of that. I just think that's amazing. And when James died, he died believing his brother was his Lord. I've asked you this before, but what would your brother have to do to convince you that he's the Son of God? I know everybody laughs. James believed his brother was the Son of God. If you've ever had doubts about Christianity, that one insight, in fact, alone should cause you to reconsider. James, the brother of Jesus, the first century brother of Jesus, believed his brother was his Lord. Anyway, so he writes this little document for first century Christians, especially those living in Jerusalem. He was the first pastor of the first church in Jerusalem. It's amazing. And here's what he says, and it's so on point. In fact, if you don't believe the Bible is true, I guarantee you believe this part of the Bible is true. true. Here's what James writes. He says this: we all stumble in many ways. Anybody doubt that? No, right? We all stumble. In other words, he says we all screw up, we all mess up in many different ways. But anyone who is never at fault in what they say or the words they choose is perfect. His point is this: when you can control your mouth consistently, that's as good as it gets as a human being. That is as mature as you'll ever be. You have attained to the highest standard. And the implication behind what he's saying is something that we know is true, if we could just keep it front and center, and that's this: that mouth control is the ultimate self-control. That's what he's saying, that we all stumble in many ways. But the person that can control their tongue, control their words, control their mouth, when you get your mouth under control, you are under control. That mouth control is the ultimate self-control, because we all have the potential, all of us, to do more damage and more good with our words than we do with our hands. We have more potential to do more good and more damage with our mouths and our words than we do with our feet, with any other part of our body. That's the point that James is about to make, that mouth control, it's the ultimate in self-control. And when you can harness, when you can tame your tongue, tame your mouth, he says, for good, you've arrived. Then he gives a little word picture that in recent years has become something that we've all seen in such a way that we understand, maybe in a way that we've never understood before, what James is talking about. He says, consider this. In other words, think about this. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. And in recent years, we've seen what happens when a campfire gets out of control. A simple spark from a campfire to burn down thousands, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of acres of forest land and homes and neighborhoods. We've seen this now. He says, just consider what a small fire can accomplish and the destruction that a small fire can bring about. He says, the tongue, your words, my words, are also like a fire. Because the danger of a fire isn't the initial flame. The danger of a fire is that a fire spreads. It's not isolated. It starts small, but it doesn't stay small. And a few words, and again, we've all been on the receiving end of this. We all have the potential to do good in the same way. When it comes to our words, a few words can create extraordinary damage to the life of another person. Now, there are two things you can do when it comes to dealing with fire. There's two ways to respond to a fire that needs to be, responded to. You can try to contain it, or you can extinguish it. And when it comes, this is so interesting. Again, I'm as guilty as anybody in this room. When it comes to the fires that we start with our words, our natural inclination is always to attempt to contain it rather than extinguish it. Do you know how we try to contain it? We explain it. But explaining isn't containing. Explaining actually spreads it. And you know this personally because someone has hurt you with their words, and as soon as they began their explanation, did it make it better? No, it made it worse because it tipped you off that they don't really know what they just did, and they don't really understand how deeply those words hurt. Explanation is an admission that we don't understand the fire we've started and the damage we've done. So don't explain in an attempt to contain. It only creates more pain. Our responsibility, whether it's with our kids, whether it's at work, with a neighbor, someone in again, that you do business with, a contractor, your husband, your wife, your fiance, the goal is to extinguish it. We are all going to start fires with our words eventually. The goal is to extinguish it. Word fires are extinguished with two things, and neither of them come naturally, and that's why we explain. That's why we contain rather than extinguish the fires. The two things required to put out a word fire, especially in the life of someone that we care much deeply about, is humility. And humility is submitting to. I'm gonna submit to you. I'm gonna place myself under you. I'm gonna take full responsibility for what I said. And sensitivity. Insensitivity requires sensitivity, not more talking. Insensitive words require sensitivity to reverse the damage and to begin to bring about healing in the relationship, not more explanations. Sensitivity, here's why. Sensitivity elevates the offended party. Explanations elevate me. I want to be understood. I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want to be misjudged for what I said. I want you to know my real intent, which is irrelevant in the moment, right? Because in the moment that I've hurt someone with my words, it's not about me. It's about the person I hurt. And to be very specific, here's the application for today's message. Here's what it looks like to extinguish a word fire. Here's what it sounds like to extinguish a word fire. You won't even need to write this down. Here's what it sounds like. I'm so sorry. And then here's the most important part. Period. Stop talking. Stop talking. Anything you say after the period sounds like an excuse which tips the other person off. You don't get it. You're about to make it all about you, even though you hurt me. Just stop talking. I'm so sorry. In fact, let's just practice this. I don't know, some of you have never said this and then stop talking. You've just kept talking, okay? So we're gonna practice it together. Ready? Everybody, if you're driving, wherever you are, all together, ready? I'm so sorry. You did it. One more time, ready? I'm so sorry. If you have to say something else, you rinse and you repeat. I'm so sorry. There's no excuse for what I said. You don't deserve that. I'm so sorry. And then zip it. You just own it and you sit in it. You own your guilt and you sit in your guilt as they sit in their hurt. And this next part is so important, okay? Depending on your personality, this is gonna be so hard for you. It's so hard for me. Don't take charge of the restoration process. Don't take charge. This is what we do. I hurt you. I feel like there's distance. Now there's a problem. Now there's separation. And now I feel like now I need to be in charge of restoring the relationship. Wrong move. It never works because when you move in their direction, emotionally, they're going to move further away, just like you do when somebody hurts you with their words and they move in your direction to explain and to make things better. You don't want to move in their direction. You've just been wounded. So do not give into the temptation to try to now take charge of, repairing the relationship. That's up to them. It's not up to you. You did the damage. I did the damage. They get to choose the speed of recovery. For those of you with kids who are middle school and older, and even some of your older children, this principle is so important, but especially when they hit middle school and high school, and for any of your adult relationships. Don't tell them, this is what we always do, don't tell them how bad you feel. You know what that is? That's a request for empathy. I've just taken something from you with my words, and now I want you to give me something else. Don't tell them how bad you feel. Don't tell them how bad I feel. How bad I feel in the moment's irrelevant. This is about them. How bad you feel in the moment's irrelevant. This is about them. Anytime I want you to feel something bad about me after I've made you feel bad, I'm just spreading the fire. I'm just communicating, I don't get it. I don't really understand the depth of the damage I've done with my words. When you've hurt someone with your words, you're not in a position to ask for anything. And don't ask for a hug. Oh, come here and give me a hug. That's a request for proximity. Why would I want to be close to you? You just did this with your words, now you want to hug me? I don't think so. Well, you feel a little stiff. Of course I'm stiff. I'd like to slug you. I mean, I'm exercising so much self-control, even allowing you to move in my direction. And again, parents, middle school and high school kids, careful with this. Come here, daddy. Don't ask for proximity. In that moment, you don't deserve it. That's up to them. And then this next one, you may disagree with. That's all right. Don't ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness is a gift. You just took something with your words. You are not in a position to ask for something else. That just feels like pressure. Let them choose if and when they decide to forgive. That's how you extinguish a fire that we start with our words. Humility. I'm gonna elevate you. I'm not gonna elevate me. Humility. It's up to you. It's not up to me. Humility. I'm owning all of it and I'm gonna sit in my shame and my guilt, and the next move is yours. Sensitivity. I'm not gonna ask you for something because I've just taken something. I'm not gonna require something else of you because I've just taken something from you. I'm not gonna ask you to do something to make me feel better because I've just made you feel horrible. It's not intuitive. But if you want to stop containing to start extinguishing, that's how it goes. And again, this is kind of just good general relationship advice. If you're a Christian, if you're a Jesus follower, this is baked in. For even the Son of Man, I know I quote this to you all the time, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served. For even the Son of Man did not show up on earth to say, gimme, 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 gimme. For even the Son of Man did not come to require something of us initially, but to do something for us and then invite us to follow if we so choose. And this is to be the posture of our relationships. And this is to be the filter for our words. So, wrapping up. Every time we speak, our words betray intention. Every time we speak, these three dynamics are at play. Our words are not equally weighted. The negatives weigh way more than the positives. Source determines weight. Remember who you are and what you represent to the person on the other side of you. And intent is usually irrelevant. Don't retreat to, don't run to intent. Just own it, put the fire out, and leave the restoration process up to the person so that they'll have the freedom to move in your direction when they're ready. These three things determine what people hear and what they feel, regardless of what we say and regardless of what we ultimately mean. And when we're wrong, James says, hey, just count on it. This is the hardest thing you'll ever do. You're gonna be wrong. When you're wrong, when I'm wrong, when we get it wrong, let's be extinguishers, not containers. It's the quickest way back. So I gotta end with this question, and you hate these questions. I would hate this question if I'm sitting out there with you today. So believe me, I've had to ask myself first. Is there anybody at home? Is there anybody in your home? Is there anybody in your family that you've crushed with your words? Maybe recently. Maybe like really, really, really recently. Is there a fire and you have attempted to contain it by explaining it and just spreading it? And you're so frustrated because you said you were sorry and you can't understand why they're not fine with you now. And you've spread this fire. Somebody come to mind? Maybe somebody at work. Maybe somebody's just a friend. If so, would you be willing, especially as a Jesus follower, to take responsibility for what you've done? And put away your containment tools. Decide, you know what? I gotta look for a way to humble myself and to create a sense of sensitivity, not insensitivity, where I'm requiring something from them after I've already taken something from them. Is there a fire that you have attempted to contain that you need to extinguish, that you have the power to extinguish? And I'll tell you what makes this really hard in an environment like the ones we're in today. This is really hard to hear when the person you need to apply it to is sitting next to you or close to you. That requires a double dose of humility. And I say, go for it. And again, whereas this is good advice for all of us, it is especially good advice. It's critical advice. It's mission critical to those of us who are Jesus followers, because this is what following Jesus sounds like. Because this is what loving one another looks like and sounds like. Paul got it right when he said this. He said, Christians, do not let any stinky word come out of your mouth. Do not let any unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but only words that are good for building others up according to their needs, not your need, that it may benefit those who listen. Every conversation is a construction site. So leverage your words in such a way that they build people up, because your words carry weight. So let's steward them well. Heavenly Father, thank you for these words from James. Thank you for the reminder. And unfortunately, some of us don't have to think too far back or think too far away to think about the person we just crushed with our words, and we did it again. It's not the first time. What is wrong with us? So would you give us the courage to embrace the fact that really mouth control is the ultimate self-control, and we all have some work to do. And Father, for those of us who claim to be Jesus followers, this is so critical for us, because so many people have been turned away from you because of the words of your followers. How embarrassing is that? Of all things to repent of, that's the thing we should repent of. And Father, I pray that our words would make people more curious than cautious when it comes to exploring faith, because that's what you modeled for us, and that's what you've called us to do. So give us ears to hear,